Larry, thanks very much for your help on this and for agreeing to. Too bad, schedules and everything wouldn't let us get you down here in person. But
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but thanks for having me.
sure, no, I think it's an important opportunity for these folks, valuable one, because the people I'm talking with that you're sort of virtually facing as we speak are the yeah, there you go, commute managers, commute program managers. I'm sure I'm not describing that perfectly, but from around the DC region, people who run what they call transportation demand management programs, which is industry jargon for how do we get more people off the road and into transit and carpools and other kinds of high occupancy vehicle commute modes, telework, get them working at home, all that kind of stuff. So these folks have the very, very difficult challenge, not only of trying to persuade people to not do what they would otherwise like to do, which is get in their car and just go.
Right.
But they also often have to set up kind of marketing displays, exhibit booth kinds of displays in office building lobbies and employee fairs and information fairs and those kinds of events. And as you can imagine, unlike at a professional trade show where people spend hundreds of dollars to wander by your booth, in this scenario, people are on their way to lunch and your booth is sort of in their way. So you have to, no, I shouldn't say in the way, I'm being a little facetious, but basically people are on their way to someplace else when they encounter you in their office lobby. These folks that are at our session here this morning have to figure out ways to attract the attention in a positive way of these folks as they walk by, and engage with them in a very quick manner that is going to both kind of, on the one hand, disarm their audience and open them up to hearing something they hadn't planned on hearing at that moment, but also sort of hopefully turn a crowd that wasn't really predisposed to hearing about carpooling or whatever into kind of an interested crowd that they can really communicate with and have a good conversation with. So it's in my mind not that far distant from someone in your shoes who has to get up on a stage. And people out there, they came in on purpose, but they're chatting with their friends, or they're having a drink, or I don't know what they're doing. They're looking down at their phone these days, probably.
Right.
So I was real curious to find out how you go about getting the audience's attention in that kind of a scenario, and then how do you kind of get them on your side?
Right. Well, first let me say, as someone who commuted to Baltimore for 15 years, I applaud the work that everyone in the room is trying to do, because it would have been very helpful if there were less people and less cars. But it's interesting because you're right that the audience is there to see you in some respect, but I think there's a couple differences. The first is sometimes I'm off in the opening act, and sometimes people don't even know you're going to be there. So if I open for a major headliner, so for example, this past Saturday I opened for Rob Schneider down in Annapolis, and they have no idea that I'm going to be there. They have no idea who I am. They're there to see Rob Schneider, and so they're having their mozzarella sticks, they're having their drinks, they're having a conversation, and the next thing you know, there's a guy on the stage that they've never heard of, and there's always this sort of there can be this feeling of who's this guy? Like, well, this guy thinks he's funny. He's no Rob Schneider. Before we even say a word, I think sometimes the cards are stacked against the opening act, because if you were any good, they would have heard of you. There's a little mind trick sometimes that you have to encounter as a comedian. the other side is just sometimes, like I just said, sometimes they just don't know who you are. And unlike a Jerry Seinfeld who's going to walk out and is going to be funny the first 5 minutes, regardless of what he says, because he's Jerry Seinfeld and people are thrilled to see him, you do have you still have to win over the crowd. To me, I think in my career, put that in quotes, I think the biggest change was my attitude and my approach, because I used to be very timid going onto the stage, and I used to often think that I did have to win them over, or what if they don't like me, or what if they don't think I'm funny, or and somewhere in there I just clicked my mindset, which is I know that I'm good, I know that I'm funny, I know that what I have to say is helpful or going to be well received by these people. It's been well received by audiences beforehand. And so there's just something that clicked in me at some point as a performer where I went, no, I belong on this stage. And it's almost like, like an animal or some prey can smell the fear on you. So I think a lot of it has to do with attitude and confidence, that you are good at what you do, that you're not there to annoy anybody. You're there to bring them something good. In my case, humor, and in your case, a great service to make their lives and all of our lives better. So I think a lot of it has to do with confidence and attitude.
That's great to know. So it sounds like, in one respect, it's really building your basic kind of presentation skills. It's sort of Dale Carnegie 101, Toastmasters 101, in the sense that you need to be comfortable with how you're presenting yourself, and kind of have your own internal game, so to speak, together before you get in front of the crowd, if I'm hearing you right.
Absolutely. I used to, go out, and even the jokes that I would start with were very self-deprecating jokes and a little soft. And, and I said to myself when I was watching other comedians, and boy, they came out and they just came out hitting. And I said, I'm already maybe at a disadvantage because they don't know who I am, or I'm a little nervous. And I'm coming out with these jokes that almost put me down in a way, which is comedy, which is self-deprecating. But perhaps I need to start with something stronger and win them over, and get them to realize that I'm funny. And then I'll do the self-deprecating, because at that point they're laughing with me and not at me. Maybe, I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, a lot of it, and it paid off, because I've worked with headliners that I had worked with 5 or 10 years ago that have commented on your strength. My goodness, you're so much stronger on stage. So yeah, absolutely, coming right out of the gate with the attitude of I belong here, and what I have to say is good. And if hey, listen, if you're not enjoying it, that's on you. It's not on me, because I know that I know this stuff is gold.
So
I wish sometimes it doesn't always work. I wish sometimes I had an NFL replay of a previous audience where I could just say, hey, look at these people. They thought it was hysterical. Let's just go to the tape.
There you go. Well, and so obviously people these days have different tastes in humor, shall we say. How do you kind of engage these people when you're in front of them without, do you ever worry about offending them with humor or anything? Like, do you kind of calibrate your jokes to the crowd? Do you kind of, they always say, think about your audience before we open our mouth, kind of a thing. But in your scenario, I mean, I've seen lots of comedians on TV, obviously, and some of them are pretty out there with the risks that they're willing to take, either they're simply willing to risk losing their audience, which is possible, or they've kind of got a good sense for who is in their audience, and they kind of know how far to push the envelope. Do you ever have that sort of opportunity before you get in front of a crowd to know a little bit more about who you're going to be performing for, so that you can, adjust your act accordingly, shall we say?
Yeah. For me, I'm for the most part not very controversial and not very dirty. So it's not a huge spectrum for me in terms of I really don't do anything that's very political or that filthy. The spectrum for me is, for example, I'm doing a corporate gig on Wednesday night. If there's a certain four-letter word that maybe I would say in a comedy club, I'm not going to say that at this. I'll be a suit and a tie. It'll be a president's dinner. So for me, it's probably more just language, making sure that I'm not saying certain words or certain topics that that are might be inappropriate for the professional setting. I don't, I've learned that in comedy, and this is probably just in comedy, it's very hard to read an audience because you just never know. You look at an audience and you might see a certain age group or you might see a certain ethnicity and you say to yourself, oh, they're just not going to like this. And I've done it on the stage in my head. I'm thinking about the next bit and I've said to myself, don't do this. They're not going to laugh at that. And it turns out to be the best thing of the set. It's really hard to read people. I think that the other thing with me is that I've always had two careers because I'm a comedian, but I always had a marketing career. And I was always associated with other brands. Even now, I run my family's music business. And so I have to be aware that, and that's the marketing guy in me, that I can't be too offensive. Some comedians, they're just comedians. And if they go out and they say something horribly offensive, they just, they're a comedian. That's what they do. But I've always had another line there of another brand that I've been associated with in my other life or a business. So I try not to be too controversial. The trick is, and I use humor, I think the trick is to find stuff that's universal, the weather, families, something that's not going to rock the boat too much.
Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that your marketing background and PR related work these days too, because that's a big part of what these folks have to do. Is they're basically marketing an abstract concept along with their services in terms of helping people connect with other commute modes and that kind of thing. And clearly, they're not going to go out to a lobby display and use blue humor themselves either. But the fact that you've got that sensibility about what kind of works in marketing and comedy, I think, is really beneficial here. Are there ways that you can integrate humor into your marketing effectively so that maybe you're not standing in front of somebody, but maybe your materials will be, people take your brochures home or whatever. Are there ways to use humor smartly, intelligently, to make yourself memorable, to make an emotional connection with your audience, with your market, without feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't put humor in anything. It's too risky. So have you been able to integrate the two in the past with different projects?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and I think that I'm always a big believer that people like to do business with people that they like. And so humor has always been a big part. When I did, and I did public relations for Visit Baltimore way back when, and I would work with travel writers. It's all about forming relationships. And so, using humor, whether it's, a lunch meeting or a phone call or that sort of thing, people, if you can make them laugh or like you said, it's all about forming that personal connection, that relationship with them. If you can make somebody laugh, it's a great first step in building that relationship and building that trust, because it sort of lowers the guard. And yeah, there are, just like there are lines that I have on stage, there's certainly lines or stories that I, hear in this. I run a retail business now, and I talk to the customers, and here's the here's a situation where I, as the owner, know the least amount. It's a long story how I took over. This is my dad's store, music store, started 45 years ago, and I am not a music person. I'm surrounded by a great team of people that are very smart. But I'm the son that everyone wants to meet and talk to, and I know the least amount of the guitars and the instruments. So I diffuse that situation with humor, and I have go-to stories and go-to bits and go-to lines that I know work, and then people walk away going, "Wow, he's a nice guy, he's a great guy." And then they ask a detailed question, I turn them over to somebody else who knows what they're doing. But yeah, I think it's critical because I think, like you said, it's all about forming that connection. And I'm a big believer, like I said at the beginning, that people like to do business with who they like. You know.
Mm-hmm. And for people who, like most of us, I'm sure we have a couple comedians in the room with us here this morning who haven't fessed up. But for most of us, maybe we feel funny off and on, but we're not confident in our ability to be humorous on demand, so to speak. Are there any sort of tricks of the trade or tips that professional comedians in general have used to sort of say, I'm not in the mood today, but I got to do this? And, for folks that are trying to come up with they're not going to stand there and crack one-liners at a lobby display talking about commuting, but are there ways to sort of set a tone, set an engaging, sort of positive, take away any sort of sense of threat about approaching my booth, kind of lines that people can use when somebody's walking by? Are there certain kinds of invitations, shall we say, verbal invitations that work pretty well to get someone's attention? So if you're in a comedy club and everybody's like, I'm sure this doesn't really happen, but let's say they're all ignoring you. They're all having a weird night. They're drinking their drinks. Yeah. They've already had 4 drinks or something. How do you kind of, before you even sort of start your first bit, quote unquote, do you have any certain lines that you use to kind of, get people's attention right away? Again, sort of in a non-offensive, non-threatening kind of way?
Well, the standard traditional comedian comes out, "How's everybody doing tonight?" And then if you make them say it again, or, it's not so much lines, not so much lines, but I think a lot of it has to do with whether it's comedy and my time in marketing. It's sort of sales 101, and the importance of body language, and being aware and awake, in terms of if the looking for visual. So this is not really about comedy, but hopefully it answers your question. So part of it is being self-aware, the way you're standing, if you're smiling, if you're making eye contact. And the second is looking for visual clues. Are they wearing a certain team's, are they wearing a Redskins hat? Are they, is it cold outside? Is it snowing? Anything that's, we use it here in the retail store in terms of the worst thing you could do to somebody. We just went through the sales training, and somebody walks in the door and says, "How can I help you?" Or "Can I help you?" Mm-hmm. And it seems, that's better than doing nothing. Mm-hmm. But it's such an easy answer to say no, just look into it, and that's it. You close the door. So it's not an open-ended conversation. You've said, "Can I help you?" They said no, or they said yes, I want this. You give them this, and they're done, and it's a transaction. It's a commodity, and there's no relationship formed at all. Versus bringing up something like as mundane as the weather, or if they're wearing a certain team's jersey, what kind of music do you like? Just getting into a conversation and letting them talk, and letting them give you the clues, because as soon as they say something about X, then hopefully I always say then you reach into your toolbox that you have an answer for X. If they bring up X as a problem, then you bring out Y and you say, well, did you know that blah, 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 blah. Or they say, so that you've got something to help them, but you've tricked them into telling you what they want versus you trying to tell them what they want. Let them tell you what they need. Getting back to the comedy thing. So one of the things that headliners always told me growing up when I was this journey was I was very likable on stage, and that was one of the hardest things to learn. That you could get better in writing, you get better in delivery, but likable was a really strong trait. And so it goes back to the body language, and smiling and making eye contact and all that. I think that if you view your role out there as, again, you have something that's of value to them, you're not a threat to them, you're trying to help them. If you're positive and make eye contact, if you engage in non-threatening, non-door-shutting conversation and form some sort of rapport with these people, then the rest just becomes a normal conversation.
So really connect as a real person as opposed to trying to.
Yeah. In fact, I had this goes back to the comedy thing. I'm on stage trying to be a comedian, and I'm, some comedians aren't funny in real life. I think I'm funny in real life. I know I've been hysterical during this interview, but I was working with a headliner, and in the green room, I was making him crack up, and he said to me, "I'm not saying that you're not funny out there, but you're even funnier in here." And he said, "Whatever this is, you need to figure out how to get that out there." And what he was saying was, like you said, I was just having a real conversation. I was just being who I was. I wasn't performing. And this was early on in my career. And so whatever that was, that natural sense of connecting with him and being funny, I had to figure out how to put that on stage and not be so forced on it.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you have. You've been successful all this time.